6 times higher, 20 times greater. 6 times higher, 20 times greater. That's what the theory of disruption indicates will happen when you pursue a disruptive course. Your odds of success will be 6 times higher. Your revenue opportunity 20 times greater, not just for your company, but for you. To be successful, you don't cope with the force of disruption. You harness its unpredictability, its power to propel you forward. Let me explain what I mean by disruption. Can I see, show of hands, how many of you, when you were in school, were sent to the principal's office? A lot of early disruptors in this room. You know, the silly little thing that takes over the world, like Toyota did to General Motors, and Netflix, they did to Blockbuster. Walmart, Sears, Uber, who were they disrupting? Taxis and Airbnb hotels. Disruptive innovation, it follows a framework. A disruptor secures a foothold at the low end of the market. Think of Toyota in the 60s. Initially, its products are inferior, its position is weak. General Motors could have crushed them like a cockroach, but they didn't. Market leaders, they rarely bother. It's just a silly little Corona. Let's go after bigger, faster, better, Cadillac. The bad news, or the good, depending on your point of view, is that once a disruptor gains a foothold, it too is motivated by bigger, faster, better Lexus. And by the time a counterattack does make sense, it's too late. Personal disruption is the act of applying this framework to the individual. You start at the bottom of the ladder. You climb to the top and then jump to the bottom of a new ladder, like the children's game, Chutes and Ladders. Urban Meyer, a master of personal disruption. He coached Florida to 2 national championships. In 2011, he jumps off this ladder. In 2012, he jumps back on the ladder. But he doesn't go to the top, he goes to the bottom, Ohio State. It's a losing team under sanction by the NCAA. They can't play in a bowl game. They can't recruit talent. The bottom. A year later, they're undefeated. 2 years later, they win the national championship. Urban Meyer is now at the top of a new ladder, and he has taken Ohio State with him. What do you think people were thinking? What were they saying when he left the Gators to become a Buckeye? In a world that is insanely hyper-focused on forward movement, a sideways move or a backward move, no matter how calculated, there's disbelief, possibly disdain, questions behind your back as to whether you will ever return to your former glory. So how do you use this framework for personal disruption? How exactly do you disrupt yourself? How do you improve the odds by 6 times? And when do you know if disruption is right for you? One of the first steps in understanding the mechanics of personal disruption is to recognize that disruption itself, it's unpredictable. We like a world in which you flip a switch and the light goes on, where it's over 1, up 1, over 1, up 1, over 1 on the graph paper of our existence. So when we work hard for days, weeks, months, even years with little result, cause and effect seemingly disconnected, it is unsettling. At our Disruptive Innovation Fund, we use the S-curve to help us gauge how quickly an innovation would be adopted to deal with this unpredictability. At the outset, growth is slow. Once a tipping point is reached at 10 to 15%, you enter hypergrowth, and at 90% or saturation, growth, it tapers off. Take Facebook. Assuming a market opportunity of 1 billion people, which it's now exceeded, it took Facebook roughly 4 years to reach a tipping point of 10%. But then once it reached that critical mass of 100 million users, it entered hypergrowth. And over the next 4 years, it added not 100 million, but 800 million users. We could quibble over whether or not it has reached saturation, but there's no question that the rate of growth has begun to slow. As we were applying this framework for investing, I had this insight that we could also use it to understand the psychology of personal disruption. This framework could work not only for companies, but for you. When you start a new role, when you start a new project, when you start anything, it's an opportunity for personal disruption. The S-curve tells you that initially progress will seem non-existent. This helps avoid discouragement. If you're managing people, you avoid impatience. As you put in the days and weeks and months of practice, you accelerate into competence, and with this comes confidence. This is the exhilarating part of the curve where all of your neurons are firing. It's the sweet spot. As you approach mastery, things will be easy. But because you're no longer enjoying the feel-good effects of learning, you can get bored. So what happens if you stay on this curve and don't jump? Your plateau becomes a precipice. That's the first step in understanding the mechanics. The S-curve helps us deal with the unpredictability, the time delays, providing milestones to watch for. The second step in understanding the mechanics is to recognize that personal disruption can be powerful not only for you, but also for your company. Broken asphalt. How did this happen? At one point it rained, it snowed, the water seeped in, it froze, expanded, it broke. Asphalt has compression strength. It can resist thousands of pounds of pressure. It has relatively little tensile strength. It can't withstand pressure from within. We are like asphalt. When we feel under siege, we batten down the hatches, do more of what we've been doing, hoping we have enough compression strength to resist the forces pounding against us. But if we have the courage to do more of what we have not been doing, this is where the relative weakness of tensile strength can actually work in our favor. Just a few small changes, like drops of water, permeate, expand, breaking our hold on the past, just enough to create space for something new, something better. Leo Tolstoy, he knew a thing or two about compression strength. He wrote War and Peace. He also knew something about tensile strength. He wrote Anna Karenina. Here's what he had to say. Revolutions are an attempt to shatter the power of evil by violence. We think that by hammering upon the mass, we will be able to break it into fragments. This only makes it more dense and impermeable. Disruptive movement, it must come from within. Again, disruptive movement must come from within. So let's think about this. The fundamental unit of disruption is the individual. The best way to drive corporate innovation is through personal disruption. Surf the S-curve waves of learning and mastering. Disrupt yourself. Let others do the same. And disruptive products, services, and companies, they will happen on their own. So how do you put the power of personal disruption to work for your company and for you? In my research, I've identified 7 accelerants that will allow you to move along the curve. The first is to take the right risks. 2 kinds of risks. There's competitive risk and there's market risk. Competitive risk. You've got a big idea, huge opportunity, the projections to prove it. You are confident there will be customers. You just have to figure out if you can compete and win. That's competitive risk. Market risk. You have an idea. Your colleagues, they think it's a silly little thing. Projections, customers, you don't know if there's a market. That's market risk. One of my friends has triplets. When they were 11 years old, they wanted to earn some money, so they set up a lemonade stand. But they didn't set up next to a grocery store. They set up next to a football field after football practice on a hot summer day. These 11-year-olds, they intuitively understood market risk. There was no guarantee that there would be customers, but there was no competition. So when the customers showed up, the entire market was theirs. They made $75 in 20 minutes. 11-year-olds. One of the best ways to take on market risk is to play where no one else is playing, like Urban Meyer did when he went to coach a losing team. For you, this play where no one else is playing, play where no one wants to play, this losing team might be a department, a person, a job, a project that's out of favor. No one thinks it's interesting. The way you can play where no one has thought of playing is not to go after the job where there's a posting and 50 people have applied and you have to figure out if you can compete and win, but instead to find a problem that needs to be solved that only you can solve. You may not be able to convince the powers to be to create a job, but if they do, yep, the job, it's yours. When I was working on Wall Street in investment banking, our bank was acquired. It happened a lot. And amidst one of these shakeups, my boss was fired. And I was moved, she says with a wink. Okay, I was shoved into equity research. That is like going from flying a fighter jet to a C-130. My ego took a huge hit. Once I got there, I was supposed to cover the cement and construction sector. And they already had a highly ranked cement and construction analyst. So what do I do in this situation? How do I find and take on market risk? How do I play where no one else is playing? There were a number of media companies going public. No analyst to cover them. As the theory of disruption would dictate, rather than knocking on a cement door that was closed, take on competitive risk, I built my own media door. Took on market risk. The S-curve, it worked. I went from the top, flying a fighter jet, not really, but pretend, to the bottom to a top-rated analyst in just 1 year. Take on market risk. The opportunity to make a mark is 6 times more likely to be yours. But like a moth to a flame, we come back to competitive risk over and over and over again. Why? Because competitive risk, it is like going into battle. There is an enemy, there is opposition that feels comfortable. With market risk, there's none of that. It's uncharted waters. No enemy, no opposition. Scary. Deal with this uncertainty and you will be successful. Be Columbus, said Thoreau, and discover whole new continents and worlds within you. This is the first accelerant of personal disruption. Take the right risks, play where no one else is playing, and then you walk through the door of that market opportunity by playing to your distinctive strengths. A distinctive strength is something that you do well that other people within your sphere do not. And this is number 2. The koala. This cuddly little animal sleeps up to 20 hours a day. One could have serious doubts about its ability to survive, except that it does something that pretty much no other animal can do. It can survive on eucalyptus leaves that have minimal caloric and nutritional value. This is its distinctive strength. But here's the shocking truth about your strengths. You don't really know what they are. So let's spy with your little eye your strengths with a few clues. What makes you feel strong? Marcus Buckingham has said that our strengths clamor for our attention in the most basic way. Using them makes you feel strong, invigorated, inquisitive, successful. If you don't know what makes you feel strong, think about the thing that you always do for people without getting paid, to which a loved one says, stop. That thing that makes you feel strong, it is a strength. What's your go-to activity when you feel out of control? Not talking about going out and getting sloshed or eating a quart of Haagen-Dazs ice cream. It might be writing code, running a spreadsheet, negotiating a deal, whatever it is. Order is restored because you feel in control. And you feel in control because you feel strong. Bless you. The trick is to use this strength deliberately on purpose, not just when you're in a bind. What exasperates you? The frustration of genius is in believing that if it's easy for you, it must be easy for everyone else. It may not be that others are incompetent, but that you are a genius in this one area. You don't know how to tell people how to do what you want done because you don't know how you know. So the next time you think to yourself, this is just common sense, you're exasperated, consider the possibility that you and they are bumping up against your genius. What you do next is a test of your leadership. Do you throw up your hands and say, I'll do it myself, or do you figure out how to explain the how-to of what you want done? What compliments do you dismiss? If to a particular compliment you find yourself saying, oh, it was nothing, I'm just doing my job. Or you think, oh, that compliment again? They're pigeonholing me. Why can't they compliment me on this thing over here that I worked really, really hard to learn? People tend to overvalue what they are not and undervalue what they are. Which is why your superpowers may not be on your resume because you overlook or ignore them. Which is why you sometimes hire people into the wrong seat because they led with what they do well, not with what they do best. If you want to fly up the S-curve, bring your superpowers to work, make sure the people who work for you bring theirs to work. Eat where no one else is eating. Play where no one else is playing. Be the only eucalyptus eater in town. Okay, right about now, at this point on the curve, it's time to do a sanity check. You're working hard, not much is happening, which is what's supposed to happen at the low end of the curve, nothing. But still, you wonder, Even though the odds of success are 6 times higher, that's 6% to 36%. There's still a 64% chance it's the wrong curve. Best-selling author Augustin Burroughs wanted to be an actor as a child. He was confident that he would be one of the greatest actors of the day, possibly the greatest, until he saw himself on videotape, and it was a stunning revelation. He says, "My knowledge that I was giving an incredible performance in no way aligned with what I saw. I sucked worse than anything has ever sucked in the history of suckage." Burroughs eventually did make his way toward acting, which he does well. But he says, "When I chose writing over acting, I didn't give up on a dream. I just gave up on my choice of vehicle used to deliver the dream." Winners quit all the time. They just quit the right stuff at the right time. Winners quit curves all the time. They just quit the right curves at the right time. So for your sanity check, ask yourself these 4 questions. Number 1, are you playing where no one else is playing, like the Wright brothers? They tested their flying machines without an audience for years. There was apathy. No press, no newspapers, nothing at the first flights. There was skepticism. Few people outside their neighborhood believed the flights had even happened until their genius flew up the S-curve and off the charts. A slow start, it's not the whole story. Number 2, are you playing to your strengths? If you've carved a niche from a position of your strength, settle in, persevere. Number 3, is it hard but not debilitating? If you look at this S-curve and it's daunting, but you are invigorated, you feel strong, growth, it's on its way. But if you're dreading your work, you're getting sick, these are symptoms that your curve is flatlining. Number 4, are you gaining momentum? In 2004, Bravo launched Project Runway, a competitive reality show for fashion designers. Only 2 in 1,000 viewers watched the premiere, 1/10 of Bravo's projection. Weeks 2 to 4 were no better. But because they were playing where no one else is playing, this is early days for competitive reality TV, and to their strengths, their industry insiders, rather than giving up, reverting to sure bet programming, they persevered. They aired the first 3 episodes over and again. Ratings quadrupled within the next month. They were still below the initial projection of 20 in 1,000 viewers, but as momentum accelerated, the low end of the curve was soon a thing of the past. If your answers to these 4 questions are no, it's time to jump to a new curve, knowing that no S-curve is ever wasted. But if the answers are yes, then say hello to the low end of the S-curve. Now what I'd like to do is have everybody stand up, talk to a person to your right or left. You've got 3 minutes, 90 seconds each to think about the curve that you are currently on and answer these 4 questions. And when those 3 minutes are up, what I will do, you'll know it's time for us to reconvene because I go like this. And then it'll be time to reconvene. Okay? Ready, set, go, and answer these questions. All right, how many of you had no to all 4 questions? Raise of hands. No to all 4 questions. Okay, how many of you, okay, 1 person, 2 people. How many of you were somewhere in between? Some no's, some yeses. Okay. How many of you said, yeah, that means a lot of you said yes to all 4 of your questions, you're just not raising your hand. So how many of you said yes to all 4 questions? Fantastic. All right, so here you are, low end of the S curve. You're saying yes to all 4 questions. Now you're ready to move into hypergrowth. And so all you need now is enough time and resources, and you're going to just get this done, right? That's a trick question. Accelerant number 3 is to embrace your constraints. Embrace your lack of time, money, expertise, whatever else you don't have enough of in order to climb this curve. 3 fast facts. Jaws. Did you know that some of the most famous scenes in this film came about because the mechanical shark that Steven Spielberg wanted to use, it didn't work. He was over budget, behind schedule, so he finally decided to shoot the scenes from the shark's point of view and let the music, someone sing it. Exactly, and our imagination do the rest. There was a postmortem done of 200 failed startups. They divided them into funded and unfunded startups. The number one reason that the funded startups, the ones that had gone out and raised money, failed, they ran out of cash. For the unfunded startups, the bootstraps, it was number 10. Skateboarders. They are some of the quickest learners in the world because they receive incredibly fast and useful feedback. Every action, every move has an immediate consequence. So I ask you, skateboarder, Steven Spielberg, startup, successful in spite of or because of their constraints. There's an amazing book, highly recommend, that has the perfect disruptor. It's called Ender's Game. Amazing book, right? Military science fiction, kids sent to a battle school to save the human race. Ender, the most successful general in this school's history, plays war games no one wants to or has thought of playing, and he has huge constraints. He gets unwanted soldiers, the rejects. He doesn't have enough soldiers, enough time, enough supervision. And yet this lack of resources, says his commanding officer, this is crucial. Ender must believe that no adult will ever step in to help in any way. If Ender does not believe this to the core of his soul, he will never reach the peak of his abilities. If we believe someone will step in to bail us out, we will never reach the peak of our abilities. When resources are at a minimum, we get scrappy. We rely on what we do reflexively well because that is all we have. And in that scrappiness, we tap into our strengths. We discover that there is an embarrassment of resources right under our feet. Because the doors we want to walk through are closed, we build our own door. And by default, take on market risk. For a disruptor, a constraint is not a check on absolute freedom. It is a tool of creation. If you want to climb the S curve, embrace, even create constraints. Accelerant number 4, battle entitlement. The belief that I exist, therefore, I'm entitled. Now, we Xers and boomers, we like to pin this on you millennials. But we're all entitled. There's a story told of a father putting his son to bed, feeling tremendous love, proud of the boy and man he was becoming. So as he tucks his son into his bed, he says, "Son, someday you're going to be a great dad." And the little boy looks up and says, "Someday you're going to be a great dad too." The more successful we are, the more we think, we believe we deserve our success. Entitlement, it comes in many guises, like cultural entitlement. We all need to feel like we belong. A sense of belonging gives us the confidence to climb a curve. But as we start to see the benefits of taking the right risks, of playing to our distinctive strengths, we start to believe this is the way things will and should always be. Think back to biology. Do you remember high school biology? You'd grow cells in this petri dish. After 3 or 4 days, the cells would use up the nutrients, produce byproducts, some of which were toxic, so you'd replate the cells and put them into a new petri dish. We work in a cultural petri dish. We belong, we feel comfortable. To avoid stagnation, toxicity sliding back down the curve, we need to occasionally replate to open up our network. Closed network reinforces our sense of belonging, but we stagnate. We're hearing the same ideas over and over and over again. An open network, we can feel like an outsider, but our thinking, it will refresh. So a closed network, we go down the curve, and an open network, we go up. Interesting research out of Northwestern University. They looked at 18 million academic articles written over 10 years. They categorized them into high impact and low impact papers. For the low impact papers, 100% of their sources, they were highly conventional, people inside their network. High impact papers, 85 to 95% were conventional, but 5 to 15% were highly novel, people outside their network. When these academics were willing to battle their own entitlement, reach out to people not in their network, they were 2 times more likely to have a high impact paper. Open up your network, and you're 2 times more likely to have an impact. I had a CEO say to me not too long ago, I've worked really hard for everything I have. I can honestly say I'm not entitled. So I asked, have you ever been driving down the street and you think, why is that car in my lane? Have you ever met someone who you thought should pay attention to you, but they didn't? So you thought, what a Have you ever shown up late to a meeting making people wait? Conversation ended. Entitlement wears many masks. It is a curve killer, but battle it, and up you go. I want to introduce you now to a fellow by the name of Ken Widmeyer. Right out of college, he went to work at the Marriott in Chicago in the housekeeping division. He wanted to make his mark. He needed to make sure rooms were clean, so when they weren't clean, he'd track down a housekeeper. 9 months in, he's done such a good job. His manager comes to him and says, I'm promoting your boss, so I'm going to promote you too. But don't tell anybody. We're going to announce it at the department meeting. Ken is on cloud 9. Department meeting arrives, 75 people in the room. His boss, his promotion is announced, everyone claps. Now it's Ken's turn. He stands up, he's 22 years old. This is my moment. 75 people, they're going to announce his promotion. It's announced. No one claps. They boo. Pretty much everyone in the room boos. He's stunned, humiliated. Worst day of his life, he's going to quit his job. But he goes home and he thinks, 75 people can't be wrong. They can't all be wrong. I must be doing something wrong. And if I don't figure out what it is, I'm not going to be successful. So he tears up the letter of resignation and he goes back to work. He seeks people out. He opens up his network. He finds out that people hide from him. They feel used like a tool. So this time, determined not to make a mark, but to change, he commits to find 5 positive things about his staff each day, real things, substantive things. A year later, he's promoted again. Internally, same department. Where most people had booed, now they clapped. hurrah. This experience 30 years ago for Ken Whitmire, it was formative, but what if he'd quit? What if it had been their fault? What if he hadn't opened up his network? What if he'd been entitled? He probably wouldn't be where he is today, the chief operating officer of Sage Hospitality, a leading hotel management company that manages Marriott hotels. One aspect of battling entitlement, like with Ken Whitmire, is stepping back. And this is Accelerant number 5, step back to grow. You crouch before you jump. You bring oars back before you glide forward. You sacrifice productivity to teach your report so you can become more productive. Personal disruption involves moving sideways. It involves moving backwards, sometimes even down. Whether you jump like Urban Meyer or are pushed like Ken Whitmire or I was, whether you jump or are pushed, in either case, it's an opportunity to grow. BRE Bank. In 2011, it was the 3rd largest bank in Poland. Under siege from a competitor, it reinvented. It went digital, offering services like money transfers via text. It even rebranded to the name mBank. Up, then down, then up again. BRE, now mBank, is at the top of a new curve. Tractor Supply. I live in Central Virginia, so I live near a Tractor Supply for the first time in my life. It was founded in the 30s to sell tractor parts to the 6 million farmers in the United States. The 50s, it goes public, but by the 60s, the number of farmers is down to 3 million. So the company is sold twice. They have 5 different presidents sliding down, down, down the curve, when finally several key executives, they buy it out. As they plow into the data, Tractor Supply discovers that the number of hobby farmers is on the rise. So they jump to a new curve to become the pet supply store for people who own horses. Revenue is up from a low of $100 million to $5 billion. Stepping back, it's your slingshot. Carefully calculated, it can catapult you forward. What is your slingshot? As you look to tilt the odds in your favor, beware the undertow of the status quo. You may like you right where you are. You may like you are, but there really is no such thing as standing still. And sometimes the only way up is down. Which brings us to Accelerant number 6, give failure its due. Let me come back to that slide. Whenever you start something new, there is a fantasy of a simple, linear world. You will work hard and your dreams will come true. But that's not always the case, is it? My moments of humiliation include bombing a speech in front of hundreds of people, being fired, and backing a business that imploded. When I fail, I'm despondent and pessimistic, and I feel like I can never show my face in public ever again. Marjorie Howell said there is dignity in suffering, nobility in pain, but failure is a salted wound that burns and burns again. Brene Brown has said failure is especially acute for corporate professionals. When the ethos is kill or be killed, control or be controlled, failure is being killed, and it elicits tremendous shame. That speech I bombed, by the time I finished, I had beads of sweat just pouring down my face. I looked like I had just run 3 miles. When I was fired, I was so devastated and felt betrayed. I thought I would never, ever recover. and the business that went belly up. How could I claim to be who I said I was? I'm not a savvy investor. I'm a fraud. When failure happens, we're not only embarrassed, we're heartbroken. Because you had envisioned a future in which you would achieve a goal, perhaps even be hailed the conquering hero, and then you didn't, and you weren't. It's important to grieve. It's critical to grieve. What comes after grief? You ditch the shame. When you buy into shame, you allow the failure to become a referendum on you, on your identity, on your sense of self. Shame limits disruption, not failure. Here's a question. Show of hands. If you and I were to sit down one-on-one, how many of you would tell me that one of your successes was sown with the seeds of a failure? A lot of us. Whether we see an experience as a failure or success, it's a choice. It will always be your choice. Paraphrasing John Milton, the mind is its own place. It can make of every heaven a hell, of every hell a heaven. The mind, it is its own place and can make of every success a failure, of every failure a success. The up and the down are part of personal disruption. Failure is a constraint, a tool of creation. So give failure its due, but choose success. Accelerant number 7. Be driven by discovery. As a disruptor, you are in search of a yet-to-be-defined market. You have a purpose, but how you'll get there is yet to be determined. You're an explorer like Lewis and Clark. When Thomas Jefferson made the Louisiana Purchase, which is a tract of land that now constitutes a very large portion of the United States, he sent Lewis and Clark to figure out what he'd acquired. They started in St. Louis, in the middle of the United States, heading to the Pacific Ocean with keel boats, large freight boats you use on rivers. They had enough supplies, they thought, to make the trip. When the Missouri River petered out, they abandoned their keel boats. When the supplies ran out, they hunted and traded with Native Americans. When they got lost, they found a guide. With each new discovery, they altered their plan. To be successful along any S-curve, you will need to alter your plan to be driven by discovery. This means that you and your friends, Lewis and Clark, will end up in a place different than expected. 70% of all successful new businesses end up in a different place too. Netflix started out as a door-to-door DVD rental service. Twitter as a platform to find and subscribe to podcasts. Korn Ferry, the executive search firm, did a study to come up with the leading predictors of C-suite success. Technical skills they found were important, but the leading predictor was learning agility, dealing with ambiguity, walking into the unknown, the ability to take a step forward, gather feedback, and adapt. We all make plans for the future, but pursuing a disruptive course, a disruptive path, requires we can't see the top of the curve from the bottom or the bottom from the top. We choose this unknown. We play where no one else is playing because we are driven. We are driven by discovery. This is the framework for personal disruption. Take the right risks. Play to your distinctive strengths. Embrace, even create constraints. Battle entitlement. Step back to grow. Give failure its due, but choose success. And be driven by discovery. At the top of the curve, the bottom of the curve, and everywhere in between. These 7 accelerants will propel you. They will propel you along the S-curve. And when you're ready, parachute you to the next. Now, a few final thoughts. as you disrupt, get the metrics right. How you measure yourself now will be different than before. Metrics are a de facto constraint. Like the skateboarders, they give you lots of feedback. There's a myriad of metrics you can use to measure your progress. Remember Moneyball, but one metric is universal: showing up. The odds of a scientist writing a groundbreaking research paper are directly correlated not to how smart the scientist is, but to how many papers the scientist has written, not to how smart, but to how many. It's called the equal odds rule. If you want to write a paper people read, you write. If you want to be a disruptor, you disrupt. A simple metric: show up and keep showing up, even when, no, especially when you are scared. And this is the other thing that no one tells you. The textbooks on disruption, they don't tell you. Disruption is, by definition, scary and lonely. When you leave your comfortable perch of doing things the way you've always done, that moment, you're in free fall. You feel a loss of identity. Your PE, your puke to excitement ratio, is so uncomfortably high, you feel like you're on a thrill ride to zero. It doesn't mean you shouldn't disrupt. It just means if you're scared and lonely, you're on the right track. If it feels scary and if it feels lonely, you are on the right track. What is your disruptive path? Why disrupt? When you disrupt, you hunger for a better life. When you disrupt, you become a problem solver, letting nothing stand in your way. When you disrupt, your odds of success are 6 times higher, your revenue opportunity 20 times greater. Most of us are pretty adept at doing the math around the future when things are linear. But neither business nor life is linear. And what the brain craves, even requires, is the delicious dopamine of the unpredictable. Saul Kaplan, the chief executive officer at the Business Innovation Factory, said, "My life has been about searching for the steep learning curve, swinging like Tarzan from one curve to the next, because that is where I do my best work. And when I do my best work, money, stature, and happiness have always followed." We give a lot of airtime to building and buying disruptive companies, and we should. But innovation, it ultimately begins on the inside. If you want to be an agent of disruption, first become its subject. We start at the low end of the curve. You shift into gears that will allow you to scale. And when you're learning peaks, you do what all great disruptors do. You walk straight into the innovator's dilemma and jump to a new curve. Because companies don't disrupt, people do. Do I dare? Do I dare? Do I dare disturb the universe? Do you? Thank you.